I run a small YouTube channel focused on urban exploration and overnight challenges. 2 years ago, I decided to do something bigger. I paid $428 to rent out the Villisca ex-murder house in Iowa for an entire night, completely by myself. If you don't know the history, I'll keep it brief. In 1912, 8 people were killed in that house. The Historical Society restored the property to look exactly the way it did on the night of the murders. There is no modern electricity. There are no light switches. It's just an old wooden house sitting quietly on a dark residential street. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted. I had spent hours walking around with my camera, talking to the lens and trying to capture something creepy. Nothing happened. I set up my sleeping bag on the hardwood floor in the downstairs parlor. I turned off my camera to save battery for the morning. Without a flashlight, the darkness inside the house was absolute. There were no streetlights shining through the windows. The silence was incredibly heavy. You could hear the faint sound of the wind pushing against the wooden siding outside. But inside, the air was completely dead. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself to sleep. About 20 minutes later, I heard it. It started as a heavy, dragging sound on the second floor. It came directly from the ceiling above my head. I opened my eyes and stared up into the pitch black. The dragging stopped. Then the footsteps started. Thud, thud, thud. It was the unmistakable sound of heavy work boots walking across old wooden floorboards. The steps were slow and deliberate. They were moving around inside the upstairs children's bedroom. I unzipped my sleeping bag and quietly stood up. I reached into my pocket and made sure I had my car keys. It's a strict habit of mine whenever I sleep in abandoned locations. I pulled my phone out of my other pocket and turned on the flashlight. I walked out of the parlor and stood at the base of the stairs. The staircase was narrow and incredibly steep. I pointed my light up. Nothing but dust in the air. I started walking up. Every single step I took let out a loud, groaning creak. I reached the second floor landing and pointed my phone down the hallway. It was completely empty. I walked down the hall to the children's room. The door was wide open. I stepped into the doorway and shined my light inside. I checked the corners. I checked under the small, antique beds. I checked behind the old wooden dressers. The room was completely empty. I let out a long breath. I actually smiled a little bit. I told myself I was just psyching myself out. It's a 100-year-old house. Wood expands and contracts in the cold. Maybe a branch scraped the roof and my tired brain just filled in the blanks. I lowered my phone, feeling completely relaxed. I turned around to walk back out into the hallway. The heavy wooden door slammed shut an inch from my face. The sound was like a gunshot. The sheer force of it made me jump backward. The phone slipped right out of my sweaty hand. I heard it hit the hardwood floor, followed immediately by the sharp crunch of the glass screen shattering. The flashlight died instantly. I was plunged into total, suffocating blackness. I couldn't even see my own hands. I dropped to my knees and blindly swept my hands across the floorboards until my fingers brushed against the cracked phone. I jammed my thumb against the power button. Nothing. The screen was totally dead. I stood back up and reached out in the dark until I felt the cold metal of the doorknob. I grabbed it, twisted it, and pulled. It didn't budge. These old doors don't have modern locks on the inside. I pulled harder, planting my foot against the bottom of the door frame for leverage. The knob turned halfway, but the door itself stayed completely rigid. Someone was standing on the other side of the wood, tightly holding the handle, keeping it shut. I let go of the knob and took a step back. I didn't say a word. I held my breath to keep myself from making any noise. At the bottom of the door, there was a small, half-inch gap where the wood met the floor. Faint, pale moonlight from a window in the hallway spilled through that gap. Breaking that thin sliver of light were two large, solid shadows. Two heavy boots, standing perfectly still, right outside my door. I stared at the shadows. I heard a sound coming from the hallway. It was slow, heavy, raspy breathing. It was so close to the wood that I could almost feel it. Then came the sound that made me realize I was going to die if I didn't get out of that room. A slow, metallic scratching sound. Something incredibly heavy and sharp was being dragged slowly down the outside of the wooden door. The unmistakable sound of a heavy blade. I didn't wait. I turned away from the door and blindly felt my way through the pitch-black room. I kept my hands out in front of me until I hit the wooden frame of a small, antique chair sitting next to one of the beds. I grabbed the chair by its legs, lifted it over my shoulder, and swung it as hard as I could into the darkness where I knew the window was. The glass shattered violently into the freezing night air. I dropped the chair, grabbed the edges of the wooden window frame, and pulled myself up. Jagged pieces of broken glass sliced deep into my palms, but the adrenaline completely masked the pain. I pushed my upper body through the frame and tumbled out into the cold. I hit the slanted roof of the front porch hard. I slid down the slick shingles, scrambled over the edge, and dropped 8 feet into the muddy front yard. I hit the ground on my hands and knees. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted across the dark lawn toward the street where I had parked. I ripped my keys out of my pocket. I hit the unlock button, threw the driver's side door open, and dove inside. I slammed the door and hit the master lock. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw the car into drive, slammed my foot on the gas, and spun the tires in the wet street. As the car pulled forward, I reached down and flicked my high beams on. I aimed the bright lights directly up at the second-floor window I had just jumped out of. The bright light hit the broken glass. I stared at the dark, empty space of the window frame. Nothing was standing there. Nothing was looking out at me. I sped down the street and drove straight to the nearest gas station. I parked next to the gas pumps, locked the doors, and sat there until the sun came up. I never went back to the Villisca house to get my sleeping bag or my expensive camera equipment.
I didn't care about the $428. People who watch my channel always leave comments asking if I think it was the ghost of the axe murderer. I don't know. I really don't. But ghosts don't wear heavy work boots. And a ghost doesn't have to physically hold the doorknob to keep you trapped in a pitch black room.